Andriy Lyubka, very happy to talk to you today. You are a Pontica Magna here at New York College in Bucharest, and you've just finished a 5-month fellowship, Pontica Magna. Could you tell us a bit about your background?
First of all, thank you for having me here as this interview and at New York College. And my background is quite simple because I'm a writer, but writer in this not so narrow sense of the word. I'm writer and translator. I'm also columnist for a few Ukrainian newspapers and websites. And I graduated from military school in my region. I'm from Transcarpathia. It is the most western part of Ukraine. So Ukraine has 4 borders with EU members, and my small region have all 4 these borders. So it is really multicultural. I grew up in a town called Vinohradiu, and it is only 15 minutes to Hungary and 15 minutes to Romania. So region is really interesting, and I suppose that due to this birthplace, yes, due to this my childhood place, then I went first of all to small university in our region capital in Uzhhorod, and then moved to Warsaw, to Poland, and graduated from Balkan studies there, and learned Serbian and Polish. So a few years ago, I suppose that it was 4 years ago, when I became, let's say, I don't like this word writer, author, probably it is better. And when I started, to live from my writing, I switched from my other activities, for example, activities in civil life, in some, in some NGOs, and also in politics, because I spent my longest experience is from politics. I've been working in politics and in political party for 6 years, and also have some interesting experience from this field, because I spent some 15 days in the prison in Belarus in 2006, and since that time I am persona non grata in Belarus. So they caught me after the opposition demonstration and so on. So my political activity was really rich with experience and emotions, and it helped me to, in some way, to redefine my interests and my searches, which on which I'm working now. Due to all this experience, both multicultural from the childhood, and this interest in other cultures and borders and so on, and also in politics, I appeared here at NEC as a fellow, because I applied with a project about Black Sea region, about borders in Black Sea region, and about Ovid, Roman poet, who I think could be considered as a symbol of Eastern Europe.
When did you discover Ovid, and why it is important for your project, dealing with borders in Central and Eastern Europe?
It is quite boring in some way, sorry, because I discovered him during my studying at military school, and we had in program, we had something like Metamorphosis, some fragments from Metamorphosis and so on, and I took a book from the library and started to read. It was really boring, but then I started to read Andriy Lyubka and discovered his biography, his sorrowful exile and so on. And I was 14 at that time, and it was time when you are so young, and you are in some way you are in the endless conflict with society, with life and so on, because you build your own temper And I think that this story about exile and about in symbolic way, in symbolic way, cooperation with barbarians was very important for me, because at that military school I felt alone, yeah? And I remember that night when I started to read that book for first time, and it was Kasser, and it was small room where you have some 50 heads on these bunk beds, and I read about exile. Ovid was exiled to Tomis, but it was not some desert island. It was not let's say forest or small village. It was harbor, yeah? And so he lived among people, but he felt alone. And in that castle, I also felt alone, because I was in some way it was crowded by people, but I felt alone because nobody understood me. Yeah? So at that time I started writing some poetry, and I was interested in arts and so on. And it is quite not so traditional for military school. Yeah? So I really felt alone, and I considered others as there as barbarians, and it was my key to open this endless story about Ovid. And from that time, of course, I started understand Ovid and his works in some deeper way, not in this banal and childish, but he's my favorite poet, and he's really his works and his faith is really is really close to me. And okay, why he is so important today? Yeah? He was exiled, banished by exile to Tomis. Nowadays it is Constanza. And today here in Eastern Europe, both in Romania, in Ukraine, in Hungary and so on, they consider their place of living, so their motherland, as in some way as punishment. Yeah. So when borders was opened, a lot of people flee away. Yeah. So to other countries, to Germany, to Britain, and so on, because they thought that it is impossible to build normal life here. And in Ukraine, it is really popular phrase that when some ordinary average people, on the bus station, we will say that they think that here in Ukraine never will be, good life is impossible. So the best way, for example, for their children is, to go abroad. And today, inhabitants of Eastern Europe consider their living place as punishment, and 2,000 years ago it was punishment for Ovid. Yeah? And I travel a lot. I suppose that I've been to some 35 countries, to all European countries, yeah? And I'm specialist in Balkan studies, so in Balkan region, and also in my childhood in this riding on the border with other countries. And not other countries, but also with other nations from other language groups, so it is impossible to understand them. Because, for example, in Uzhgorod, it is on the border with Slovakia, and it is quite okay to cooperate with them because you understand the language, it is Slavic and so on. But when Rani is on the border with Hungarian and Romanian, it is impossible to understand that language, and that is why we live so close, but we do not know anything about the other, yeah? So from the opposite side of the border, or our neighbors who live with us, but they are from different faith and different language. And that is why, till now, we are surrounded by barbarians in some way. Yeah? We suppose that, for example, let's say, in Romania it is okay to joke in this way, that Romanians are barbarians, but why they are barbarians? Because we don't know anything about them. Yeah? We don't know their best writers, operas and so on, because we are so lazy to discover it. Yeah? And in this way, position of Ovid, who was first man from the West, who came here, and during his exile, what is really important is that he learned local languages of local tribes, yeah? So Getic and Sarmatian. And he even wrote that he used to write some poems in that languages for local people. Yeah, so and performed on some feasts. This example of Ovid, who started his exile with with strong hate to people who surround him, and after a few years he became in some way local also. Yeah? So he discovered their culture, their language, and this transformation is really good lesson for others and example.
There are some hypotheses you yourself talked about it, that actually the Ovid's exile never took place. It was an imaginary exile.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes, of course. So because we have data about Ovid's exile only from his literary works, and during the Middle Ages there was theories that, for example, Ovid could invent exile, create exile like some advertisement or some trick, but I think that it is we must trust him, and it is better to consider that he was in Tomis, and now on the place of Tomis is Constanza, because we have no data from historians from the Augustus era about Ovid's exile, but still we have nothing about. He was really celebrity of the time, yeah. So, but we still have no data about his burial in Rome. We cannot find his grave, and some memoirs about his death and so on. So, I think that he really was exiled to Tomis. But it is, as I said during my presentation at NEC, of course, for such kind of star like Ovid did, it was really tragedy to be exiled from Rome. His home was, very close to Capitoline, and to be exiled in some limes of the Western civilization. But this exile and this mystery, because we don't know anything about this exile, in facts, made some good kindness to Ovid, because this mystery was inspired a lot of people during all 20 ages after his death, to think about him, and also to try to discover some facts, discover some truths, and this mystery is really really good trick, because since that time we have long generations, including all best writers from all these eras. Yeah? So Dante wrote a lot about Ovid, Byron, and so on, because Ovid is, in some way, it is a symbol of this romantic fate of poet, tormented by tyrant.
So Ovid was an inspiration for you, was an example, and was a pretext to undertake this journey across borders in this region, in the region of the Black Sea. You traveled and you presented a travel from Odessa to Baltic, and Ovid was your companion, and you tried to have a dialogue and understand his experience at that period and nowadays experience. What was the most pregnant impressions you gathered during this trip?
First of all, I must say something about my research, because I thought that it is really interesting, for example, to imagine that you, author, are Ovid, yeah? And to write something about how cold it was in Tomis during the exile and so on. But then I started to understand that probably it is more interesting to imagine that you are barbarian. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And you are barbarian, and you met Ovid. You don't know that he is a famous poet, you don't know anything about him, but he's really very strange person, because you don't know why he is punished here, yeah? Exiled here, and he don't want to work. he writes something, some understandable symbols on papyrus and so on. And the key for from my understanding of Ovid was to go to Constanza, to ancient Tomis, from three different directions. Yeah? So because Ovid usually wrote that Constanza Tomis is surrounded by barbarians. So we also read something about details of the landscape there and so on. And for me, it was interesting, to travel to Constanza using his Tristias and the Epistula ex Ponto like Asian guidebooks. Yeah? And the second clue was that at that time we have two main characteristics of barbarians. First of all, a barbarian is the man who speaks some ununderstandable foreign language. It is first. But second of all, for Greeks and for period of Roman Empire, barbarians was nomads. So it was synonym for nomads. And that is why this clue of traveling, not only think and write about Ovid and about his fate and imagine some new theories and so on, but to travel, it is like to be really barbarian in that era sense. And for me, it was important, to cross these borders, also during which exists also during Ovid times. And that is why I started my trip from Ukraine, from Odessa and Ovidiopol, and head off to Danube, because Danube was the very limes of Western civilization during the Augustus reigns. And it is interesting that now, after 2000 years, Danube is still a very important border, which we can consider as a limes of the West, because on the Danube there we have border not only between Ukraine and Romania, but also between European Union and NATO and Ukraine. Yeah? So it is interesting, and Roman Empire was famous of this quality of the roads. Yeah? And really till now, roads on the Ukrainian side we can say that they are absent. Yeah? And local people used to say that they have no roads, but only these visible directions on the ground. Yeah? And when you cross this border, and in Romania you have really good roads. Yeah? So in this comparison, it is also interesting, to see very small but meaningful details. Yeah? And that is why I started my essay from Moldavia, because when you go from Reni to Galants, you must cross this 440 meters of Moldavian territory, access to the Danube, and for Giurgiulești, because in some way Moldavia is in the middle. Yeah? So Moldavia is still in this transformation process, and in Moldavia you have something, you have something Romanian, let's say, but you have also this background of Soviet Empire, and that is why it was interesting to cross this 400 meters and start essay there on the limes, and then go to Constanza, and then from Baltic, because when I came here to Bucharest, first of all, I went to museums and so on, and in the Romanian National Museum of Arts, in this gallery, I saw a lot of beautiful canvas about Baltic. Yeah? It was really important place for Romanians, because Queen Maria in some way also was exiled, yeah? by her son. She was very influenced woman, and that is why he said to her that you must go somewhere, and she built the palace there. And during the interwar period, she invited a lot of famous Romanian artists, and that is why now in this National Museum of Romania you can find really a lot of beautiful canvas. and now Baltic is in Bulgaria. So it was like a challenge for me to go there, yeah, and try to find something in that region, because usually in such regions which where borders were changed so often, you have really interesting identity of the local people, yeah. And I went there, and the second reason was that Ovid made history to Constanța by the land, yeah. So he passed this region from Baltic to Constanța also. And I tried to speak with other people and discover the same situation as in Ukraine, for example, because usually they consider others, also local others, as barbarians. Yeah? So their attitude to Roma people in Baltic, to local Turks, yeah? So to local Muslims, and to Romanians is really, how to say, I suppose that the best word is wild, because in that places like Budjak in Odessa region, or in Baltic in this Bulgarian now part of Dobruja, they are really afraid of other, because other can bring some new problems, new war, and they want to erase all signs of their existence. And for example, when I asked in this, it was only 20 kilometers to Romania, and when I asked the waiter in the restaurant with big billboard with some text in Romanian and with menu in Romanian and with possibility to pay in Romanian lei, what do you know about local Romanian people? He said that it was only, this region was only annexed by Romania, but there was never any Romanian soul and so on. And it is, in some way it is funny, but we must understand that in other circumstances it could be really dangerous, because I made my, NECT gave me a possibility to go to 1 month long research, and I chose Bosnia and Herzegovina, where you have these borders and where you have these stereotypes on literally on every step, yeah, and you have these borders, for example, between neighbors and people who grew up together, some Croats and Serbians and Bosniaks, these local Bosnian Muslims. They speak the same language, they know each other very well, and even those Bosniak Muslims, they are not like Muslims in some Middle East and so on, because it is they are really similar in some way, yeah. But they started crucial war there only because of these stereotypes and only because of using these differences in dangerous way. And that's why for me it was important to put myself in the position of barbarian, of other, who is considered by others as a man who is on some bottom of the civilizational scale, and so it was my clue.
You are here a writer in residence. This fellowship allowed you to be in contact with various historians, people working in the classics, anthropologists. How was this experience, even though you have a background in social sciences, with a master in Balkan studies? How was this experience of you as a writer in collaboration with various scholars?
It was really useful because, first of all, I never worked in such situation where you have this type of seminars during you work on your project, and you present it and you receive some advices, some critics also, and so on. Because usually we writers have very different experience. For example, you go and you present something, you receive applauses, and everybody say, "Can I take photo with you?" Yeah? That's all. And this experience was important because first of all I met interesting people from other countries, and we already established some interesting projects. I don't like this word project, but we established some cooperation. For example, with Serbian scholar Alexander Pavlovic, we started to work on some issue of Serbian magazine, which we dedicated to contemporary Ukrainian culture, and now I work as editor. Yeah? And it was only because we met here, and because we spoke with him about stereotypes, about mutual stereotypes. I asked him, what do Serbians know about Ukraine, and he asked me, and it was really funny because it appears that Serbians really don't know nothing about Ukraine, because they think that okay, it is some Orthodox country, it is some kind of Russia, but probably a little bit different, yeah. And so we established something, to fight these stereotypes. And also, for example, it was useful because when other fellows discovered that I'm interested in borders, I immediately, so during the fellowship, it was only 5 months, and you know how other projects are going on, and about the plans and deadlines and so on. I immediately received an invitation to Turkey to some symposium about Black Sea and South Mediterranean symposium on borders, refugees, and so on, because it is really, my topic. Yeah, so it was useful. And third thing is that what is good with these scholars, yeah? When you work on your book as a writer, you can be, you can have inspiration, and you can have long period of, of some despair in some way. Yeah? So what I learned here is that when you have this boring period or despair and so on, you can work on the topic, but not writing or not typing. So you can read books, you can ask other people and so on. So it was in some way inspiring for me that you can use on also these minuses of your mood, and when it is impossible for you to write something, when you have no new ideas, it is possible to dig your data, and it was really nice.
You said that this period here was also for discovering more about Romania, a country which you said in your project that is not so much talked about in Ukraine or in Ukrainian cultural life. What were your impressions, your discoveries about Romanian history and artistic life, and about Bucharest?
I suppose that Romania is a totally undiscovered country in Ukraine, and probably only people, in these borderlands know something. But in Ukraine, we have no data about contemporary Romania. For example, when I came here, I wrote some column which was really popular in Ukraine, because it was, you can see these Facebook shares, and it was more than 1,000 shares, and it was really simple column I wrote. It was called 5 Facts About Romania, and I collected some facts which could, really surprise Ukrainian reader. And for example, I wrote about economic rules. I wrote about this fight with corruption. I wrote about Romanian decision switch from Cyrillic to Latin and wrote, because for Ukrainians, Poland was and still is example of development, of fast development after this transformation process. So I wrote that we can consider that Romania is Poland, is nowadays Poland as because of all these reforms and because of economic growth, first of all. Yeah, so it is country which is developing really very fast. And for example, in Ukraine, it is also not so common to know that what is the difference between Moldavia and Romania, or probably that there is no big difference. So, for example, Moldavian and Romanian language are the same language, in some way. And Ukrainian state also, which I mentioned it in my essays, that our politics, Ukrainian politics towards Moldavia and Romania was divided et impera. Because, for example, in Odessa region, you have some regional program, to support these national minorities. They give some monies and so on, and but they support only Moldavian minority, yeah, because for them it is for Ukraine, let's say, they suppose that it is better, to have two countries, not this grand big Romania. And I suppose that it is really anachronical, method, and it is built on this lack of trust between our two countries, and it is built on the stereotypes. Because also I have a lot of different conversations here with Romanian people about Ukraine and so on, and a lot of them said that we considered Ukraine before the Russian invasion like in some way hostile country and a hostile culture, because we thought that Ukrainians and Russians are the same, that it is other name of Russian, province of Russia and so on and so on. But now when we understand that it is not true, we started to support Ukraine, and it was very nice for me during the visit to this National Museum of Arts, when someone from Guard, when he asked me where I'm from, and I said that I'm from Ukraine, and he replied, Slava Ukraini, and it is some our revolution device from Euromaidan revolution. So it was really nice moment. So our important work today is to discover each other, and to put some work in this process. Not only we have borders together, and it is really nice, and not only because of Russia attacked Ukraine, but it is better for us when we will cooperate on the other level. And during the NEC fellowship here, I suppose that I've been invited to and participated, of course, into 5 or 6 debates into Bucharest International Poetry Festival, and also I met some poets here, some writers, and I invited 2 of them now in September 2016. We'll participate in our best poetry festival in Ukraine, Medina Chernovic, and we found some translators who translated from Romanian, and it is really good example when you have some personal relations. Yeah. So when you met someone, you read his books, poems, and so on. When you became friends and you started, to cooperate in not as a business, but it is really because you see that he is a good writer and you want to support him, and to discover him to Ukrainian readers. And it was really useful period, and I hope that this connection, this friendship will will be fruitful also in future. And last thing, Bucharest. My last column from Bucharest will be called Universe of Matei Basarab, because I lived on Matei Basarab Street here in city center and in some perfect flat and so on. But when I came, it was cold and it was really dirty on the street, and it was the day was so short and so on. And I remember my first impressions, and they were not so good about Bucharest, because before I've been to Cluj, for example, and I have a thought that probably we can find also borders here in Romania, because Cluj is really clean city, very nice and so on, and Bucharest is very chaotic, and I call it in some way Byzantine city. But during these 5 months, everything changed so much that, for example, I have 10 more days here in Bucharest, but I already feel something like nostalgia, and because I really used to this Matei Basarab and to all these neighbors and neighbor shops, people who work there, to these my roads from Matei Basarab to Philharmonia, to opera and so on. And it is now it is some part of me when where I lived and have some important and nice moments in my life. So now Bucharest for me became really, it has some kind of charm now, because it is hard to compare Bucharest with, let's say, with Prague, or some German cities or so on. But when you go, for example, to Switzerland, you feel like you are in the hospital. Everything is so clean, and you started to understand that you are probably you are not in the right place, because you cannot do nothing. You cannot go to the forest and have picnic, with some fire and so on. And here in Bucharest, you can catch some real life. So this chaos, because I travel by car, and this traffic is really terrible. That is why I usually when I went out from Bucharest, I try to do it 6 a.m. because no cars on the streets. And this chaos is in some way has strong charm of other city. And what I really like to see these changes in the city, because you can see some abyss between very rich people and between really people with problems, financial, with who lives in some it is hard to call it houses, but when you go through the city, you see how slowly, but step by step, it is changed, and I think that in 5 years probably Bucharest will be ordinary and boring, European capital. But now it is really interesting, and for me as a poet, it is useful and meaningful, because you can find real life here.
Andriy, what are your next plans? I mean, you'll go back to Ukraine. How you would involve yourself in what is happening in Ukraine, intellectual and political life?
My plans, my first and most important plan is to return to my region, to my town, and I'm going to have some leisure with fishing. It is my first and most important plan. I'm dreaming about some fishing on Tisa River, and then from September till the end of the year, I have really busy schedule, because I have a few days ago my recent novel was published in Poland, so I go to Poland for this route with launching of in most important cities, Then I will spend some 1 month in Wrocław, which is now the European capital of culture, and they have some residence program for writers. And my first book in Polish was published in Wrocław, so I'm connected in some way with this city. And we have these Meridian Chernobyl festivals and book fair in Lviv, the biggest in Ukraine, and I will have this new book this fall, so I will present it. I'm going to Amsterdam festival, Read My World. Then I'm going to 1 month long residency to Hungary, to Pécs, is on the west in Hungary, and I will return directly 2 days before the New Year's Eve, and that's also, it is really busy. But then I will spend some time in Ukraine. But what can I do? I cannot go, and fight on the front. So I cannot. The best thing I can do it is writing. So I can write something, probably something interesting or important for Ukraine during this process of reforms, and it is my, it is only one way I could help Ukraine. So write good text. That's all.
Andriy Lyubka, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you
Good
for
luck
having me
on your project.
Thank you.